Hello, everyone, and welcome to Firstpost America. We're live in Washington, D.C., and coming up on the program, the fragile ceasefire between Iran and Israel hangs in the balance as tensions in the region continue to simmer. We've got this and latest on other stories, but first, a look at the latest headlines. Iranian authorities say they have transferred prisoners out of Tehran's notorious Evin prison hours after it was hit by an Israeli airstrike. Several Western activists had been jailed in this notorious prison as well. Uganda's ruling party says the country's long-serving president will seek re-election in early next year after almost 4 decades in power. French anti-fraud authorities ordered Tesla to stop the commercial practices after an investigation found several consumer law violations. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem announces funding to set up immigration detention centers in Florida in an effort to expedite the deportation of undocumented immigrants. And millions in the United States sweat through an extreme heat wave as several cities see record temperatures soaring past 100 degrees Fahrenheit. We begin with the latest from the Middle East. From air raid sirens to missiles in the sky, from provocations to a dangerous new escalation, and from a truce call to its possible failure, there's a lot that's unfolded in the turbulent region over the past 24 hours. President Trump expressed his frustration, lashing out while speaking with reporters.
You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the doing. Do you understand that?
The top headline continues to be Iran's attack on a key U.S. military base in Qatar. Retaliating against U.S. strikes on its nuclear sites, Tehran launched a barrage of missiles on the largest American military airbase in the Gulf, the Al Udeid airbase. Explosions were heard across Doha and projectiles were seen in the night sky as the attack occurred. In a post on Truth Social, President Donald Trump said 14 missiles were fired at America's Qatar base, out of which 13 were knocked down by air defense systems, as the remaining projectile headed in a non-threatening direction. President Trump also added that Iran had given an early notice of the strikes and no deaths or injuries were in fact reported. The U.S. also said that its base reported no substantial damage. The second biggest development came just hours after the Iranian attack on the U.S. base in Qatar. It was President Trump's announcement of a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. In a post on his platform, Truth Social, President Trump said that Israel and Iran had fully agreed to a quote-unquote complete and total ceasefire. He added that the ceasefire would be a phased 24-hour process beginning at around 4 o'clock GMT on Tuesday, with Iran unilaterally halting all operations and Israel following suit 12 hours later. Both Iran and Israel confirmed the ceasefire. However, it did not last long. And just a few hours after confirming the ceasefire, both Iran and Israel traded blame over violating the truce. Israel said it intercepted missiles from Iran and ordered its forces to respond fully. Shortly after this order, the firings by Israeli defense forces reached the heart of Tehran. Iran claims Israel launched 3 waves of attacks in parts of the country, while Israel claims Iran launched at least 5 waves of missile attacks. Now, despite days of hostilities, Iran's government has said it's taken necessary measures to ensure the continuation of its nuclear program. Tehran said it plans for restarting the facilities were prepared in advance, and its strategy is to ensure the production and services are not disrupted. On Saturday, the United States struck the Fordo, Isfahan, and Natanz uranium enrichment facilities in Iran. And then on Monday, Israel said it had once again bombed the Fordo nuclear site, which is buried under a mountain south of Tehran. The U.S. and Israel say the strikes were aimed at crippling Iran's nuclear program. Meanwhile, hours before the ceasefire was enforced, Israel and Iran claimed they inflicted heavy damage on each other. Iranian state media said that a key nuclear scientist was also killed in northern Iran just before the ceasefire was announced. And in the capital, Tehran, residents reported one of the heaviest rounds of attacks by Israel. Meanwhile, in Israel's Beersheba, an Iranian missile attack killed at least 5 people and injured dozens others. The cycle of attacks and counterattacks continues between Israel and Iran despite the ceasefire. And with both sides trading blame and missiles, the so-called truce appears more fragile than final. And as Iran launched its retaliatory attack on a U.S. base in Qatar, leaders across the world condemned the strike, urging for calm in the region. The first responses came in from the Middle East, with Saudi Arabia, which restored ties with Iran in recent years, condemning the Iranian strike, calling it unjustifiable aggression. Riyadh offered to deploy all its capabilities to support Doha, with whom it had fraught relations in the past. And the United Arab Emirates also denounced the strike, and the Israeli military called the Iranian attack a threat to the whole world. The IDF says the attack was further proof of hostility and of the fact that Iran is a terrorist state which not only threatens Israel, but the entire Middle East. The Kingdom of Bahrain said it affirms its full support for the sisterly state of Qatar. It also pushed for a resolution of disputes through peaceful means. Denouncing the attack, Kuwait said it was a flagrant violation of Qatari sovereignty as well as international law and the United Nations Charter. Kuwait also called it a dangerous escalation that threatens peace, security, and stability in the Middle East. And Iraq also joined the chorus condemning the Iranian strike. Its foreign ministry warned of a broader confrontation and heightened tensions in the region. And outside the Middle East, Russia welcomed a ceasefire between the two sides after U.S. President Trump announced a halt in hostilities. China said it too is closely following the developments in the Middle East and urged the two regional foes to seek a political resolution.
China is closely following the development of the situation in the Middle East. We do not want to see the spiral of escalations and hope that a ceasefire can be realized as soon as possible. Facts have proven that military means cannot bring about peace, and that dialogue and negotiation is the right way to solve problems. China calls on the parties concerned to return to the right track of political settlement at an early date.
French President Emmanuel Macron called for a return to negotiations after Iran carried out a retaliatory strike on the U.S. base in Qatar. Macron said that the spiral of chaos must end and called on all parties to exercise the utmost restraint and de-escalate. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz urged both Israel and Iran to follow a ceasefire. He added that if the ceasefire succeeds, it would be a positive development that would make the Middle East and the world safer. European Union Chief Ursula von der Leyen said that the continent welcomes the announcement of a ceasefire. She also added that a truce was an important step in restoring stability in the region. The UN chief Antonio Guterres also urged diplomacy to end the conflict between Israel and Iran, and the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese called on Iran and Israel to implement the ceasefire and said that diplomacy must replace any escalation.
Well, what we want to see is the ceasefire announced by President Trump implemented. We think that we do want to see dialogue and diplomacy replace any escalation, and President Trump's announcement we very much welcome.
Meanwhile, Japan has welcomed U.S. President Donald Trump's announcement of a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, saying it strongly hopes the truce will be implemented.
Japan considers the de-escalation of the situation the most important thing. We are extremely concerned about any retaliation and continuously hope the avenue of dialogue, including talks between America and Iran, will reopen.
In South America, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has insisted on his calls for peace in the region. And Venezuela has also proposed an urgent summit to push for an immediate ceasefire between Iran and Israel.
And the war continues to escalate. It could end in a highly destructive war, even nuclear. Because the level of madness that the war leader, Netanyahu, has could lead to starting to launch nuclear bombs against Iran. Or is it that the United States feels proud of the history of Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya? Enough. Enough of wars. Enough of threats of using force. Enough of using military force to destroy people. Enough. I trust in the good force of the peace consciousness of the American people and it is the American people who must defeat war.
Leaders across the world, especially West Asia, are urging for peace and calling for dialogue. Still, it's unclear if the plethora of global voices can be heard above the deep hostilities and resentment shared by these two warring nations. And now a look at the weapons that are on full display as the war between Israel and Iran deepens. From ballistic missiles to drone swarms, from laser defense to covert airstrikes, this battle is unfolding in the sky, on the ground, and behind computer screens. And then there's Washington dropping the heaviest hammer. The U.S. launched a massive buster bunker bombs on Iran's nuclear sites. Here's the full breakdown of the cache of munitions defining the conflict.
Ballistic missiles. Those are what Iran heavily relies on. Since the 13th of June, it has fired hundreds of these at Israel. And most recently, when Tehran attacked the US airbase in Qatar, it fired short and medium-range ballistic missiles. First, how much time does it take for a ballistic missile fired from Iran to reach Israel? 12 minutes. Some can carry cluster bombs that split mid-air and then scatter mini explosives over large areas. When talking about Iran's missiles, we can't ignore the heavy hitter. It is Iran's most feared missile and is capable of carrying the heaviest payload. The Khorramshahr 4 missile, also known as Khyber. This is a medium-range ballistic missile and has a range of over 2,000 kilometers. This was deployed by Tehran hours after the US bombed Iran's nuclear site. Next is the Fateh 1 missile. Tehran claimed using it against Israel. These missiles were used for the first time in this conflict. It is built by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and travels at 5 times the speed of sound. It can even maneuver mid-flight, making it hard to track or intercept. It's 12 meters long, has a range of 1,400 kilometers and carries a 200-kilogram warhead. Runs on solid fuel and is fast to launch, hard to stop. Now let's talk about Israel's strike force. Fast, silent and deadly. Israel's war strategy began in the skies with the F-35I stealth fighters, custom built for the Israeli Air Force. These jets slipped through the Iranian radar, striking nuclear sites and air defenses with laser-like precision. Alongside them, F-15s and F-16s bombed missile bases. But it didn't stop there. On the ground, Israel waged a covert war. Mossad built a secret drone base inside Iran, smuggling parts in piece by piece and building strike drones on site. Some of these drones hit missile launchers, others struck air defenses. Mossad also planted precision-guided munitions near key military sites, triggered remotely to take out high-value targets. Behind it all was Israel's artificial intelligence systems, scanning data, marking targets, and coordinating strikes in real time. Then came the United States. It didn't just join the fight, it took out Iran's deepest, most guarded nuclear sites with bunker buster bombs. These were carried out by the B-2 planes. It is the US Air Force's stealth bomber and it's designed to evade radar. These deliver deep ordnance inside enemy territory. In this operation, the B-2s dropped 14 bunker buster bombs. It was the largest B-2 mission in American history. Now, the earth-shattering bomb. It's called the GBU-57. Weighs 30,000 pounds and is 6 meters long, and it's built to do just one thing: smash through fortified bunkers that most bombs can't even touch. The GBU-57 can rip through 18 meters of reinforced concrete, or punch down 61 meters into the earth. So, there's no explosive fireball on impact, it's designed to burrow deep before detonating. And unlike most bombs, this one doesn't destroy buildings. It destroys mountains, bunkers, and whatever is underground. These were used on Iran's Fordo and Natanz nuclear sites. Next is the Tomahawk cruise missiles. These are designed for precision strikes and were launched by the US forces from submarines. They have a range of up to 2,500 kilometers with a low altitude flight path to avoid any sort of detection. These missiles are satellite guided and programmable mid-flight, meaning it can change targets even after being launched. More than 24 Tomahawk missiles were launched at Iran's Isfahan facility.
And when it came to retaliation against U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, Tehran picked Al Udeid, an American military base in Qatar. But why did Iran only pick the American base near Doha? What makes Al Udeid the most important U.S. military installation in the Gulf? And if the ceasefire does not hold, what are the other American targets in the Middle East that could be on Iran's list? Here's more on the story.
This is Al Udeid, the US military base in Qatar, which was the only point of Iranian retaliation after America hit 3 of Iran's nuclear sites with utmost precision. Iran launched a barrage of missiles at the US military base, which is around 60 kilometers from the Qatari capital. Loud explosions were heard in Doha, but echoes were meant to reach the White House. Located in a desert outside Doha, Al Udeid is the largest US military facility in the Gulf and arguably the most important US military installation in the region. It is home to US Central Command's Combined Air Operations Center, the nerve center for air power for CENTCOM in West Asia. This airbase has been used by the US, the UK and allied nations for coordinated air campaigns in Iraq and Syria, drone strikes in Yemen, and logistical support for Afghanistan operations. The base spans over 7,600 acres and has two 12,000 feet runways stretching into the Qatari desert. Built in 1996 with Qatari funding and expanded after the 9/11 attacks in the United States, the base today hosts more than 10,000 US personnel, along with a rotating cast of coalition partners. It also hosts a range of military equipment including B-52 bombers, F-15 Eagle fighter jets, KC-135 refueling tankers, surveillance aircraft like the RC-135 Rivet Joint, and cargo aircraft like the C-17 Globemaster and the C-130 Hercules. Al Udeid also boasts a battery of Patriot anti-missile interceptors, advanced radar systems, hardened aircraft shelters, and extensive fuel storage facilities. Before US hit Iranian nuclear sites on June 21st, Washington relocated dozens of its aircraft from Al Udeid. In fact, satellite images show when Iran struck Al Udeid, around 40 US military aircraft were not present at the base, and the fleet at the base was down to just 3 by June 19th. The US hosts several other crucial military bases in the region. These are in Bahrain, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia and the UAE. While Al Udeid is the air hub, Manama in Bahrain is home to America's naval hub in West Asia, which hosts around 9,000 US personnel. These two bases form a complementary architecture: naval dominance in the Strait of Hormuz and airstrike capability from Qatar. Next is the Camp Arifjan in Kuwait. This major US Army base is just about 55 kilometers from Kuwait City. It serves as the main logistics and command hub for operations across the region. Further south in the UAE, Al Dhafra Air Base is a key site for reconnaissance, intelligence missions and combat air support. And in Iraq, the Al Asad Air Base remains strategic for air operations in Iraq and Syria. This was the same base targeted by Iranian missiles in 2020. Last week, with aggression at its peak, Iran managed to breach Israel's Iron Dome. Now it has targeted America's largest base in West Asia. So if provocations continue, Tehran would certainly not hesitate aiming at other American assets and military installations in West Asia. And if Trump declared ceasefire does not hold, West Asia could plunge into an unprecedented crisis.
And finally, as news of the Iran-Israel ceasefire broke, global stock markets reacted positively. In the United States, the S&P 500 future rose 1%, while NASDAQ futures climbed just over 1% earlier in the day. Europe's stock 600 gained more than 1% in early trade, and in Asia, India's equity benchmark indexes rose as much as 1.3% before pairing those gains. The MSCI's Asia Pacific Index outside Japan jumped just over 2%. Furthermore, Japan's Nikkei gained over 1% during the day. And Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index surged over 2% as well. Also, markets in Singapore, Sydney, and Taipei also surged as investors breathed a sigh of relief following President Trump's ceasefire announcement.
I think that the market is currently in a good mood, and but cautiously good mood, and really depends upon what is the next step taken by the Iranian government, the US government, and Israel governments as well.
But despite the broader stock market's positive sentiment, oil markets moved in the opposite direction after Israel agreed to President Trump's proposal for a ceasefire with Iran. Brent crude futures fell about 5.3% to $67.66 a barrel. Meanwhile, the U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude also slipped 5.5% to $64.76 earlier in the day. This sentiment came as investors were relieved that Iran did not retaliate to a U.S. attack on its nuclear facilities by throttling oil transport through the strategic Strait of Hormuz, and the Iran's retaliatory strike on a U.S. base in Qatar caused no disruption to oil fields. But oil is not the only commodity that's facing a slump. Investors have also stepped away from traditional safe havens such as gold, which prices dropped to a 2-week low as risk appetite improved. Spot gold fell just over 1% to $3,326 an ounce after it hit its lowest level since June 11th earlier in the day. Meanwhile, U.S. gold futures dropped 1.6%, and other precious markets, spot silver and palladium, also slipped during the day following the ceasefire announcement. And looking at the currency markets, the U.S. dollar also slipped against most major currencies. Against the yen, the dollar fell 0.75% to 145.03. Meanwhile, the euro rose 0.27% to $1.116. And the yen and euro benefited from the sharp fall in oil prices. Israel's shekel also jumped 1.5% against the dollar earlier today, while the Australian and New Zealand dollars also rose on the ceasefire news. Yet amid all of this, only the digital currencies bucked the trend, with Bitcoin rallying sharply, climbing past $106,000 after the ceasefire announcement. This followed a brief dip below the $99,000 mark over the weekend when the U.S. struck 3 key nuclear sites in Iran. So as the markets continue to digest the ceasefire developments, investors remain cautious and turn all their attention on whether the truce holds and how geopolitical risks unfold in the days ahead. That's our show for today. We certainly thank all of you for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you right back here again tomorrow. Thanks everyone for watching.